The reigning Super Bowl champions are returning the same core here in 2025, but will they have the same success? That is the question here for the Philadelphia Eagles, entering their new season where they look to go back to back on Super Bowl titles. Welcome back, everybody, to 32 on 32 here on Chase's Sports News, where we preview every NFL team season with a team reporter. Today, we preview the Philadelphia Eagles' upcoming season with a very special guest, a team reporter covering the Eagles on The Athletic, formerly with PHLY, Zach Berman. Zach, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Chase.
So happy to have you here today. And at the time of this recording, it's Wednesday night. This time tomorrow, the Eagles have gotten things started with the Dallas Cowboys. And what a joy to think about the fact that football is back tomorrow. So absolutely incredible. We're so excited for it. Overall, I want to hear your thoughts. I know you've been covering the Eagles now for a little while. What stood out to you from the Eagles training camp and preseason action, and then maybe some of the recent practices leading up to this week one battle?
Yeah, so I guess you can look at it from like the macro big picture perspective, and then, the nitty gritty, the position battles, things like that. I think, big picture, this is a team coming off the Super Bowl, right? You want to see how they respond. And one of the things that has really stood out, it's been a talking point for them, is how they've moved on from it. How there's not this hangover. They're not fixated on last year's Super Bowl.
Sure.
It's really something that they've tried to put past them. So that's kind of the big picture. As far as the nitty gritty, the inside football, if you will, trying to figure out who that second corner is going to be, the safety competition, the depth on the roster. They avoided major injuries for the most part. They lost depth wide receiver Johnny Wilson, but other than that, not really any season-ending injuries. So that is obviously something you're looking for in camp. They have a new offensive coordinator, so seeing how that transition's going. So those were kind of really the main focuses in training camp this year, Chase.
Yeah, I mean, a new offensive coordinator, Jalen Hurts, has, I think, dealt with that in every single year since high school. He knows how to adjust to new systems. And you mentioned putting the Super Bowl year behind them. Sean McDermott said on a recent edition of Hard Knocks, which I've been following with the Buffalo Bills, he said, being successful last year does not guarantee success in the next season. There's a lot of turnover in the National Football League. You can go from first to worst quickly. And with Philadelphia's core, it doesn't look like that is going to happen, but you need to stay focused and keep the pedal on the metal. And I think there was a clip 13 days after winning the Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts was out there training and frustrated with himself with some of the drills that he was doing. So you got to have that eye of the tiger, and you got to stay focused. And Philadelphia is doing that. And as I mentioned, they return pretty much the same core as they did last year. Barkley dominated during the regular season for the first part of the playoffs. Hurts and the defense took care of things in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. What about that team last year allowed them to just click at the right time? And after the bye week, after a 2-2 start, they didn't lose another game that Hurts played all the way through.
Yeah, so there were a few things from a football perspective, right? I mean, you saw the way the offense shifted to a run-heavy approach, particularly after that bye week. The defense got their legs underneath them. Cooper DeJean entering the lineup was a big change. The Eagles got healthier on offense. You think like after, I thought the offense played real well in week one last year. Then A.J. Brown goes down during practice, and when A.J. Brown's not in your offense, that changes a lot.
Sure.
You think about week four against Tampa Bay. They were losing DeVonta Smith. They didn't have Lane Johnson. So there's a handful of factors there. But as far as what clicked for them, I'll be honest with you. This was just an outstanding, talented team. Like the talent on the team, it was incredible to watch. I covered the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl in 2017, and that wasn't as talented of a team. That was
Right.
a team that was kind of they were the underdogs, and don't get me wrong, that they had really good players and they played outstanding in the Super Bowl. But I thought the Eagles were just clearly the best team in that Super Bowl going into it, right? And even in the postseason. Now, I would have liked to see them play against Detroit if Detroit was healthy, but the reality is the Eagles really had no weaknesses, and they could run the ball, they could pass the ball, they could rush the quarterback, they could defend, they could cover the pass, they could stop the run. They were relatively healthy, or I shouldn't say relatively, they were mostly healthy. They had 21 of 22 starters healthy for the Super Bowl. So, and, they were a tough-minded team, and that's a credit to Nick Sirianni and the coaching staff. So there was a lot that went into it, but what jumped out last year was just how overall talented they were and how good of a football team they were.
Yeah, and you mentioned two important things. It's getting hot at the right time and it's health. And when you can have a combination of both, you have to capitalize. I mean, personally, I am a diehard Baltimore Ravens fan, and they had both going in their favor. They were hot going into the playoffs and fully healthy, and they didn't capitalize. And I think that we saw games this year where I think what made Philadelphia such a challenging team in the NFC, it feels like there are a lot of AFC teams that are more physical, and the Eagles could compete with those teams. And I think when you saw the Eagles physically compete with the Baltimores of the world and the Kansas Cities of the world, I think that just signaled to everybody, like, not only is this team the most talented in the league with little weaknesses, as you mentioned, but they can compete physically with any team in the league. And I think that just made them so difficult to stop.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chase. And it's interesting you bring up Baltimore, right? I have a book coming out September 23rd called Leap Year, and it chronicles the Super Bowl season. And one thing I wrote in there in the introduction to the book, or it was that a driving back from the Baltimore game, so that was Thanksgiving weekend, was when it really clicked. Like, this is a legit Super Bowl contender. And the reason I say that is because teams don't out physical Baltimore the way the Eagles did, and the Eagles were the more physical team that day. And that, I remember, if you do that to Baltimore in Baltimore, that jumps out to me, and that jumped out to me last season.
For sure. I mean, as a dire Baltimore Ravens fan, I can tell you firsthand, like, the Ravens are always the more physical team out there. They punch you in the mouth, and teams usually don't know how to respond. And I think, there were a few plays in particular, that Cooper DeJean tackle on Derrick Henry, things like that just signal to you, like, the Eagles are here, and to come into Baltimore and do that against a team that outside of that game generally was the best in the NFL after an 0-2 start, them in Philadelphia. The fact that they were able to do that was so fascinating. I want to talk about kind of this offense a little bit. It's a debate that Eagles fans and particularly Philadelphia people inside that locker room don't really care about. But I think it's an interesting discussion because it's like, who is the reason for the success offensively? Some people can point to Nick Sirianni. Player-wise, some people say it's Hurts, but some, view him as maybe just a quarterback that fits in a good system. Some people say Barkley, but they had made the Super Bowl 2 years before anyway. What really is the reason why Philadelphia's offense is so consistent with a new offensive coordinator every year?
Yeah, is all of the above an option, right? Like, you
Right.
can't do it without a quarterback like Jalen. Jalen does so much for that team. Obviously, you saw the way Saquon elevated them. I think they have, if not the best wide receiver combination in the league, then certainly one of the top three. But if I had to give you one answer, I would say the offensive line. And the reason I say the offensive line is because, so this is my 14th year covering the Eagles. So 13 seasons, there's only been 2 years that were really bad. And in those 2 years that were really bad, the consistent thread was that the offensive line got decimated by injuries. So when you have Lane Johnson and you have Jordan Mailata and Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens, last year Mekhi Becton, but even you go back and just look, in my frame of reference, these years covering the team, Brandon Brooks and Jason Peters and they've had so many, Isaac Seumalo and Jason Kelsey, of course, right? I mean, they've had so many good players on that offensive line, and Jeff Stoutland being the offensive line coach. I started covering football when Andy Reid was the head coach, and I kind of learned then that you win in the trenches, and this team wins in the trenches. So I would say the offensive line is the biggest reason, but you can't win without a top level quarterback, and I think Jalen Hurts is a top level quarterback. These skill players are the envy of the league. So it's really all of the above. And I hope that answer is not, kind of a cop out, but it's the truth in that they're loaded talent wise. And so you look at Howie Roseman in the front office, and you look at ownership and Jeffrey Lurie and some of the moves that they've made and the cash spending that they've done. There are a lot of factors. And there's something that Nick Sirianni told the team back during the offseason. Saquon Barkley relayed it this week, is that if you think you're the reason the Eagles won the Super Bowl, you're right. If you think you're the only reason they won the Super Bowl, you're wrong. And that's kind of what it is. There's a lot of reasons why they won it. There's not one single reason why they won it.
Right. It's a team sport. It's not just an individual league. And that's why I kind of find the MVP award dumb. It's like you're essentially trying to reward someone who has a lot of success with minimal talent, but those usually aren't the ones that go and win Super Bowls. It's the teams that are most cohesive and have the most talent. And you mentioned that offensive line, so talented. And then again, that's not even talking about Saquon Barkley and his 2,000-yard rushing season. Health has always been an issue for Saquon. Obviously, you can't predict injury, but even behind this Eagles O-line and with the same system, you can't expect Barkley to get 2,000 yards, but will he remain the most productive runner in the league, you think, if he's able to stay healthy?
Well, if he's able to stay healthy, he's going to be up there, right? A lot of this obviously depends on the way defenses play them. You think to the Super Bowl last year, Kansas City was determined to bottle Saquon up. And so what happened was Jalen was throwing downfield to AJ and throwing downfield to DeVonta, and that's why Jalen had such a good game. So a lot of it, is dictated by the defense. But yeah, I mean, if Saquon stays healthy, given the type of player he is and the offensive line that they have, and what Jalen Hurts gives you as a +1 in the running game, I see no reason why he's going to have a significant drop off. I mean, 2,000 yards is ambitious to predict, but yeah, there's no reason why he can't have 1,400, 1,500 yards.
Right. Yeah. I mean, of course, you can't expect someone to replicate a 2,000-yard rushing season, but he's so great. And you bring up the Super Bowl conversation. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't with this Philadelphia team, because I thought for sure after those first 2 playoff games, just shut down Barkley and that'll be the answer. And outside of one big run, Washington did that. And the entire game, Kansas City did that. But then Hurts is able to beat you. And so then you mentioned no true weaknesses. This team can beat you from so many different areas. You mentioned having success with offensive coordinators every year, the incredible game in the Super Bowl. Just, I know you've known Jalen for a while. You know him as a person, you know him as a player. What makes him such a great person to quarterback this team, whether that's as a player or as a leader?
Yeah. So, there are a handful of factors, right? I mean, first off, he's talented and he's tough-minded, right? Those are 2 things you got to look at. And, those are 2 like non-negotiables. You have to be tough-minded to play that position, especially in this city. And I think that from a football perspective, he gives you that +1 element in the run game that the Eagles utilize, and that's huge. I think he's a really good passer. He doesn't get enough credit for that. He throws a great deep ball, right? There are times when, maybe he can be a tick late on something, but he really does a good job taking care of the ball. And that was kind of an outlier in 2023. And the Eagles had a bad collapse in 2023 when they were turning the ball over. But you look otherwise, you look this past season, you look 2022. He's really smart. He's a smart person. He's a smart player. He's really smart with the ball. So I point to that. But just I think he's so tough minded. And one thing Nick Sirianni will talk about is that he's unselfish, right? I mean, he's willing to kind of cede to Saquon Barkley so often last year. And you think back to the Super Bowl against Kansas City the first time, that might have been the best game I've seen a quarterback play, and they didn't win the Super Bowl. And so Jalen, he said that changed his soul, and
That was his
he really,
profile picture. Literally the Chiefs confetti falling down as he walks
yeah,
home.
yeah, and he did everything, and it wasn't enough. And last year it looked different for most of the season, but they were in the winner's circle at the end. And that's the thing. I know this time of year there's a lot of debate about who ranks where. And the challenge with that is like, I mean, I'm not taking anything off of Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. I mean, I think those are the top 4. I would put Saquon. Oh, I'm sorry. I'd put Jalen Hurts number 5. And I know there are quarterbacks who kind of get ranked ahead of them on some of these lists. And I say, Jalen's in the winner's circle quite a bit, right? He's made the playoffs all 4 years as a starter. He's made the Super Bowl 2 of 3 years. He's won the Super Bowl once. You do that, it's hard to knock it.
All he does is win. And I think I spoke with Paul Jolovitz, a local radio host in Philadelphia, on my podcast earlier this summer. And that's literally what he said. I'm stealing the quote from him. All he does is win. And when you have a guy like that, I mean, he truly is, I think, an anchor for this offense. Seems like a terrific guy. Just seems like a terrific winner and person for this locker room. And obviously, his success has been instrumental to the overall success of this Philadelphia team. Real quick before we break down the schedule and wrap things up like we do with every team here on 32 on 32, I want to talk about the defensive unit. I mean, all pros just sprinkled in there. Jalen Carter, a lot of people are picking for Defensive Player of the Year. Zach Bond is one of the best inside linebackers in the league. And then, of course, the secondary, Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell going into year 2. Some additions in there as well. Jihad Campbell. There's so much on this defense. They were kind of in that elite stature last season. Is that going to continue this coming year?
Well, they're replacing a lot of key players, right? And you're right. They have blue chip players at all 3 levels of the defense, and that's a good place to start. And Vic Fangio is one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. But that said, right, they're replacing Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham and Milton Williams on that defensive line, and they don't have Nakobe Dean to start the season, and they're replacing Darius Slay and CJ Gardner-Johnson. So there's some key players that aren't here, but they have ascending players. They have a young, athletic defense. They only have 2 starters over the age of 25, assuming Adoree Jackson starts. If Adoree Jackson didn't start, they would only have 1 starter over the age of 25. And I think there are players who are just going to be better this year, and I think Vic Fangio understands his personnel better this year than he did a year ago. If you look at it over time, defense is there's more variance there. It's not as sticky if you're the number 1 defense to be a number 1 defense the following year, but
Sure.
this defense should be a top 10, top 12 defense. And if the offense is as good as it should be, then the Eagles will be in that conversation at the end of the season again.
I mean, it took an epic collapse at the end of 2023 for this team to fall off, and part of that was defensively. So if the defense is average, which they should be far better than that given the talent on this roster, and you mentioned the youth, sometimes it's bad, but oftentimes that's good too. I mean, they have talent in the best version of their the best shape of their lives right now starting on this team. And so if they could really have those breakout campaigns like a Carter, like a Zach Bond, again, like those blue chip players in the secondary, as you mentioned, then yeah, I mean, they're going to complement this offense extremely well. We do this with every team. Let's break down the schedule. By the way, that is supposed to be a final record of 12-5, 12-5, 13-4, something along those lines is my projection here for this Philadelphia team. I think they're going to be great. I think, you have a really tough schedule, 4th hardest in the National Football League. You have obviously Washington twice, and you have Buffalo, Kansas City, Detroit, Green Bay on the docket as well. A good amount of primetime and standalone games. Overall, what stands out to you from the schedule and my projection? Again, 12-5, 13-4, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, I think Eagles fans should sign up for 13-4. I had them 12-5 in that range. There's a few things that stand out here when you look at it. Is that after week 1, so that Thursday game, we're talking on a Wednesday night after tomorrow night, they're in Kansas City for a Super Bowl rematch, and then the Rams, the team they played in the playoffs last year, come here, and the Bucks, a team that the Eagles have struggled with,
Right.
in recent years. They lost to them last year. They lost them in the playoffs a few years ago. And so there's a handful of playoff teams at the top of the schedule. They don't have back-to-back home games all season. It's home road, right? And I think that Detroit game in week 11, something that's really looming. That was a matchup that a lot of people wanted to see last year, me included. That's in Philly. I think that Green Bay game, especially after the Packers got Parsons coming off the bye in week 10, that's going to be something to watch. But it's a schedule, and then obviously Buffalo in week 17. But I think this division is certainly navigable. There hasn't been a back-to-back NFC East champ in over 2 decades, but I think that can change this year. The Eagles need to stay healthy. That's the key. And they play a lot of primetime games, and they have, I think, 6 or 7 non-Sunday games too. So there's a lot of short weeks in there, and it's going to be a team that needs to figure out. It needs to be tough-minded, and you evolve over the course of the year. And something that Nick Sirianni talks about often is dealing with adversity, and adversity is going to happen. How do they deal with it? But this is a team that it's going to be in the conversation of like the 4 or 5 teams that can win the Super Bowl. I feel confident in that, and barring major injuries, they'll be in that conversation.
And you talked about kind of the opening of that schedule. Again, Dallas, that line's been, I feel like, 7.5 points for 3.5 months since that game was scheduled. So, you get that game tomorrow. The Eagles should be able to pull that off again tomorrow at the time of this recording. And then you mentioned those really tough games at Kansas City, the Rams, the Bucks, the Broncos should be improved. You go 3-0 in that stretch of Giants, Vikings, Giants, I think teams that won't be in the playoffs. Then you get the bye and you buckle up again for a tough stretch. There really is no easy path throughout the schedule. You mentioned no back-to-back home games. It's just there's no time when the Eagles can take their pedal off the metal. And so if they're able to go 12-5 or 13-4, they'll be battle tested heading into the postseason. And I'm excited to see what they'll do this year. And you mentioned, no NFC East repeat champion since 02, something along those lines. And so I've been thinking about that the entire offseason and trying to wrap my head around, is there a way that doesn't happen? And even if the hype is real with Washington, which I don't know if it is, Dallas certainly isn't going to get there now with that defense. I can't see a way that unless Philadelphia is completely decimated by injury, that they don't end that streak this year because they are just way too talented on both ends. And I think way too well coached as well. I think Sirianni's a great coach for this team, obviously, a Super Bowl winner last year. They're just too talented in all phases to not repeat as division champs. So I'm excited to see what they'll do. Again, 12-5, 13-4, somewhere in that ballpark, and another opportunity to prove their worth in the postseason. That will become the question, though. Zach Berman, real quick before we wrap up, I want to hear your prediction real quick because, look, we saw Kansas City with back-to-back Super Bowls, but it is a hard thing to do in the National Football League. Is another bowl in the cards here for Philadelphia in 2025?
Well, it certainly can be. I mean, I have them 12-5 and, getting to the championship game. But the reality is this, is that, especially if the NFC North's beating each other up, right? If the Packers and the Lions and, the Bears, the Vikings, if they're beating each other up and the Lions or the Packers don't get that 1 seed. And I think I have a hard time seeing someone coming into Philly in January and beating them, whether that's the Lions, the Packers, the Niners, the Rams, you tell me who. So if the Eagles get the 2 seed, it's a little harder, right? But as of now, I have the Eagles making the NFC Championship game. But I mean, if you told me they were going to make the Super Bowl again, I'd say, yeah, I can absolutely see that. If you told me they were going to win the Super Bowl again, I would say I can absolutely see that. I still think, the Chiefs, Ravens, Bills are outstanding teams. The Eagles are obviously an outstanding team. I still like the Lions. I like what the Packers did, obviously getting Parsons, and that was a tough team last year. I think the Niners are going to bounce back. So really, the way I see it is that if you're one of those teams in the mix, then it's kind of, as we talked about at the top of the show, you get hot, you stay healthy at the right time, and in the playoffs, it's survive in advance, right? I mean, the Eagles don't win the 2017. They don't win the Super Bowl in 17 if Julio Jones makes a catch along the sideline in the end zone in the fourth quarter. If Jalen Carter doesn't bust through the middle of the line against the Rams last year, Matthew Stafford hits someone down the seam wide open. I think it was Higbee for a touchdown, and the Rams might win that game, right? So there's a handful of things you can always point to. The playoffs, it's a play here, a play there, but I think the Eagles are absolutely going to be in the mix.
It's so situational. And you mentioned that Rams game. Ian Eagle just came on my podcast. We talked about how dominant the Eagles were. And he's like, not many people are talking about that the Rams were this close. And then from that point on, Washington and Kansas City both couldn't touch Philadelphia. But the narrative going into the NFC Championship was really not too high on this Eagles team. It's that they barely stuck through, against a team that was playing through adversity, and Hurts was struggling and all that. But they found a way to get through, survive in advance, as you just mentioned. And you mentioned being in the mix. That's all you got to do. Stay healthy, get hot at the right time, and Philadelphia will certainly have an opportunity to go back to back. Zach Berman, thank you so much for taking the time here today to join me to preview the Philadelphia Eagles season. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Chase. Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap this one up here alongside Zach Berman. Check out all of his work, at ZBerm right there. You guys can see all of his work for the Eagles. And then, again, that book, Leap Year, about the Super Bowl season coming up September 23rd. So be sure to buy that as well. I'll be one of the people securing a copy for myself as well. Signing off alongside Zach Berman, I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Chase's Sports News.